Hello, welcome. Good to see you all here at church tonight. Yes, it's church. I know we're in a garage, but it's still church. So first of all, hello to all of you at Harvest Riverside. Give yourself a round of applause right now, Harvest Riverside. Not OC, just Riverside. And I'm doing this by faith. Okay, hello to all of you at Harvest Kumalani. And now here at Harvest OC, give yourself a round of applause too. Yes. So lots of married people here, Kathy, and I think they're at the right place.
Some are not married.
Wait, are there any singles here? If you're a single or dating, raise your hand. Not many. Okay, a few. There are a few. Okay, so Kathy, what should they expect here tonight?
You're going to get solid biblical teaching and very practical advice and help. That's what I love about Shaunti and Jeff. How practical the things they tell you can help and turn your marriage around. And what's so cool about it, Greg, is that it's not like, oh, you have to climb Mount Everest. You have to do all these really, really impossible things. It's like just a few simple tweaks and changes can make all the difference in a marriage. And so it gives everyone hope, everyone. And so we're just super excited that we're doing this couples conference at all three campuses, and that each of you are going to have an opportunity to hear this, because we know that marriages have been under stress and under pressure through this time of COVID, and this is going to be an opportunity for you to invest in your marriage, invest in your future. So
we've been spending a lot of time as married couples together, maybe more than ever, with all of the things that are happening. Why don't you introduce Jeff and Shaunti to everybody?
Oh my goodness. Well, okay, I could go on and on and on about how highly educated they are, graduates of Harvard. Jeff is a lawyer. Shaunti worked on Wall Street. She also worked on Capitol Hill. And her background is interesting because she was very versed in research and data research and all of that. And the Lord, I don't know, Shaunti, you just have to tell him how he turned the direction of your life's calling into pouring into couples, and they wrote amazing New York Times best-selling books for men only and for women only. And then they've written many other things. We've had them speak on our radio program about love and money, which is never really about the money. It's about communication, from what I learned. And anyway, but we're so grateful that they're here. They came all the way from the East Coast, and they are thinking this is rather warm weather. I mean, you're sitting there and we're freezing here in California. Kumalani, you got another story there, but these guys have come a long way to be with us tonight, and I don't want to take any more of their time, Greg, because we want to hear from them.
Why don't we open with a word of prayer, and then let's ask God's blessing. Father, thank you for this time to be here, and I thank you for every marriage represented here in this place that we're in at Harvest OC, at Harvest Riverside, over in Hawaii, Lord. Every marriage is precious to you. The family is so important to everything, our nation for starters. And so we pray that this will be a time of strengthening marriages, strengthening families, blessing people that will understand what it is you've called us to do, and that we can pass this on to another generation. So we ask your hand to be upon this whole conference tonight and tomorrow. And we ask all of this in Jesus' name. All right, well, let's give a warm harvest welcome to Jeff and Shaunti Feldhahn as they come and minister to us.
Wow.
I'm not sure we can live up to that introduction. Thank you.
I don't know, we'll try. And real people.
Actual people
amazing.
In an event.
This is fantastic.
Wow. This is incredible. And we're so excited also. We're so sorry we couldn't be with Riverside after all. And really sorry we couldn't be with Kumalani. But we're glad to be with you here live streamed, and for anybody who's watching live stream at home and eventually online later. So
So we'd just like to say some of the stuff that we're going to be covering over the next couple of days here are really simple things to understand. Now, they might be challenging at times to apply in our lives, but they're not complex. And this particular topic that we're going to be talking about tonight, some of the items, secrets from the research that we were able to discern from the happiest couples. What do they do differently from the rest of us? And so we gave this talk. We've given it many, many times. And one time about 3 years ago, we were in Ohio and we'd given this talk. And it was, it's the secrets of the happiest couples. And so afterwards, we were standing back signing books. And an older gentleman walked up to me and handed me a piece of paper. And then he walked away. And on the paper, it said, "The secret to a happy marriage." And so, of course, I unfolded it and looked in it. And what he'd written there was, he said, my wife and I, when we first got married, we committed to each other that she would handle all of the minor decisions that faced us in our marriage. And I would handle all of the major decisions. And he said, after 40 years of marriage, I can honestly tell you, we've never had a major decision. So,
that is not the secret
it's not
to
one
a
of the
happy marriage,
secrets.
just so you know. That's not it.
But the fact of the matter is, what we're going to be talking about are some of these things that are the little things that will really help you in your marriage. Now, we know that some of you here are probably really just nailing it in your marriage. I mean, you're thriving and everything feels like it's going right. Some may be challenged in a challenging spot. And some, you might not be in a relationship right at this time, but you want to be. We hope that what you're going to get from the talks tonight and tomorrow will help you wherever you are in those areas, because it'll give you hope that you can do it.
Yeah, and for you to be aware, and Kathy sort of started us off on this, it is all based on research that we have done over the last 17 years, something, gosh, that sounds like a long time.
And
makes me feel
it all
old.
started because Shaunti was confused by me.
Could have been. But because I have that research background, because I have that Wall Street background, it ended up putting us on a path to doing this type of analytical research to try to dig out what are those things that matter most to our lives, to our relationships, that we wouldn't necessarily otherwise realize, or we've got a lot of misunderstandings in certain areas, and trying on purpose to dig out the little things that make a big difference. So as you hear us go over the course of our sort of next few sessions together, just be aware that even when something is challenging, be aware it's not our opinion. Sometimes it contradicted our opinion, actually. But it is based on these large national studies of what works, what doesn't work. How do people think, how do they not think, in order to be able to bring really good, rigorous data. Now, that said, be aware also, we're going to be making generalizations. We have to do that. But there's always exceptions. For example, our first session, now there's going to be a pastoral talk first thing in the morning. But our first session tomorrow is going to be to help women understand men. Ladies, anybody interested in that topic? All the men are like, what are you going to tell them about us? Okay, I'm seeing all the looks on the men's faces. But that's an example of if, for example, 75% of men said one way, 25% didn't, right? Everybody's an individual. The key is to use all of this that we found that we're going to be sharing with you as a starting point for your life, your relationship, and where God has you. So, in order to give you a scope of what we're going to do tonight, we are going to be sharing what are the most important secrets of the happy couples, and we'll get to that in just a second. Then the pastors are going to share tomorrow morning, and then we're going to come back and talk about understanding men and understanding
women.
Understanding women.
Which will take about 3 hours.
No,
the other one.
Hey. No.
So, can I say that what we've found over the years and over much of this research is that it's really not the big issues that trip us up so often in our relationships. Oftentimes, it's the little issues, and it's because we actually don't understand that we're both kind of trying to work for the best of the other, but we're oftentimes trying in the different wrong frequency. And what happens is sometimes just because of misinformation or misguided assumptions, we sometimes say things that will hurt one another, or we fail to say things that will convince and tell them how much we care.
And we have no idea that we're not hitting the mark. Yeah.
So that's what we're hoping by the end of this weekend, that you'll at least be questioning some of the things that perhaps the stories that you've said about your spouse or your partner throughout the time that you've been together.
So I'm going to start us off on the secrets of the happiest marriages with a story that has nothing to do with marriage, but it's very illustrative of the main point, which is, Jeff and I, we read a lot of different books, and there was a book that came out, gosh, I don't know how long ago.
10 to 15
years ago. Some of you might have read it, by brothers named Chip and Dan Heath, who I think are out here somewhere in Southern California. And it was called Switch. And it's a book about how do you change something? Like, how do you change a department at work? How do you change your mind? How do you change a marriage? How do you change anything? And one of the stories that they told was a story that was very representative of one of the main points. And they told a story of a man named Jerry Sternin, who worked for the childhood development arm of the United Nations. And this was back in the early 80s, maybe, late 70s, early 80s. And there was this huge problem with systemic childhood malnutrition in Southeast Asia. And the UN, this Children's Development Group, was sending Jerry Sternin and his team into all of these countries to try to solve this problem of systemic childhood malnutrition. And it seemed really big and overwhelming, right? Because it's like there's so many issues to solve. How do you solve malnutrition? You have to solve poverty. Like, wow, how do you solve poverty? Or, a lot of the malnutrition came because there wasn't clean drinking water. That seemed pretty overwhelming. Like, how do you build water filtration plants? Or there was a lot of corruption. How do you solve that? Like, there was a lot of food aid going in, but it wasn't getting to where it needed to go. And so it just seemed intractable. And country after country, they would go in and they would try all this stuff and spend millions of dollars, and the needle wasn't moving. It just wasn't, things weren't changing. And so they get to the next country along, which was the country of Vietnam. And as they're going in, Jerry Sternin basically says, time out. This is ridiculous. Like, we are going to do the same thing that we've always done, and we're going to get the same results. You know that today we call it the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. He said, we're going to do the same thing. So how are we going to approach this differently? And he said, I have an idea. Not every child in Vietnam is malnourished. There's some that are doing just fine. Instead of spending tens of millions of dollars to try to tackle all these huge, intractable, big, overwhelming solutions that seem impossible, why don't we spend a few $100,000 to try to find all the kids who are doing great and see if they have anything in common? And so they scattered out throughout Vietnam, and they found that there was one thing that all these kids had in common. It turns out, and he was worried that what he would find would be kind of big issues that you can't really replicate. Like, these were all the kids of sort of the wealthy people in the community, for example. But that wasn't it. What he found was that when the mothers of these children would make their porridge or their gruel in the morning, the normal thing was you dip the water out of the river and you strain it to strain all the little stuff that's kind of floating in the water, and you make the porridge with the strained water. Well, the moms of the well-nourished children skipped the step of straining it. And in the process, they didn't strain out all the little vegetation and all the little shrimps in the water. These kids were getting more vegetables and more protein than everybody else. And Jerry Sternin went, we don't have to solve poverty and water filtration plants and corruption. We have to teach the moms not to strain the shrimp. And they did, and it solved the problem of systemic childhood malnutrition in Vietnam. Solved it. Now, of course, there are still malnourished children in Vietnam, but as a systemic, society-wide issue, solved it. And they went, okay, we need to do this kind of thing in the next country along, and the next country along. And that is one of the reasons that the UN had such success from then on in addressing this problem. Now, why do I tell you that story? It's because when we come into any kind of marriage issues, if we have challenges, even if we're in a season of just a few days or a few weeks, much less a few years, where things seem just hard, it can feel kind of overwhelming. It can kind of feel like you've got to go into 3 years of psychotherapy to solve this stuff. And instead, I wanted to find out what happens. This Jerry Sternin story really kind of hit us. I wanted to find out what happens when you approach something a different way for marriage. Because it is really easy when you are having issues in marriage, it's really easy to okay, we got to figure out what our problems are in order to surface them and address them, which is fine. That's good. That's needed. Go to counseling and all those things. But if that's all you do, you're only focusing on the problems. And I wanted to see, are there people who are, the way that the book put it, is the bright spots, the sort of the role models, the things you can look at that are working well. I wanted to see, is that the case in marriage? Are there people who are that equivalent of those kids in Vietnam, those moms that are doing something different, that we can do the same thing in marriage?
And this was honestly one of my very favorite research projects that we ever did. And it was because whenever we would do a speaking event, part of the agreement with the venue was that they would set up 4 or 5 interviews for us for 30 or 45 minutes each interview with couples that they identified as having the happiest marriages in their congregation. So we would sit with these people for 30, 45 minutes, and we would just ask them questions. And quite frankly, we'd ultimately get to what makes you so happy. And they really couldn't explain it in a lot of cases.
It was really interesting.
They would just say, well, we communicate really well. Okay, what does that mean?
What do you do differently?
Well, we communicate well. Okay, but describe what that means. And they couldn't. And so what would happen? We didn't know what we were looking for. And month after month after month, countless numbers of interviews, we would begin to see patterns that they would use different words to describe similar things. And so that's what made up kind of our hypotheses for the research, which we then surveyed and came up with.
And ended up doing a massive nationally representative survey in order to figure out what is it that the really, really highly happy couples do differently from everybody else, even people who are in a happy marriage. Much less someone who's in a sort of a so-so marriage or a struggling marriage. And we identified 12 little things that the happy couples didn't even know that they were doing half the time, that made a big difference. Now, we're going to race through about 4 of those tonight. We're not going to be able to get to all 12.
And what I can say, and this is for me as a guy, maybe you guys, I need things rather explained simply for me. That's just me. And these things that we will be talking about are not rocket science. They really are not things that can't be attained by any one of us here in this parking garage.
They also, by the way, all but one of the 12 work really well and create a happy marriage, even if only one person of the couple does it. Isn't that amazing? That was one of the really, really interesting findings, is that you can actually totally change your marriage completely on your own.
So let's jump in.
Let's jump in. Okay. The first, you know what? Someone's going to ask me this question, so I'm going to answer it before we get started. I know someone's going to come up to me and go, how did you define happy couples? So let me just answer that question. Who here was asking themselves that question? Nobody? Because I don't have to define it if nobody was going to ask that.
I think you better define it.
Okay. Just really briefly, the way that we did this, on the survey, we asked a question that looked like a little in the middle of the survey question, and it was secretly our filter question. And it was basically, are you generally happy in your marriage these days and enjoying being married? And the answer choices were yes, exclamation point, yes most of the time. Number 3 was sometimes yes, sometimes no. 4 was no, not really, and 5 was no, exclamation point, okay? And what we did was these surveys, it's too complicated to explain how, but they were all taken not only anonymously, but independently. The husband and the wife would never know what the other person answered.
But we were able to match them up together.
But we could match them up together. There was an identifier that allowed us to match them, even though it was anonymous. And what we looked at was if both the husband and the wife, independent of each other, both chose yes, exclamation point, those were the couples we wanted to talk to. Those were the couples that we wanted to see, what are they doing differently from everybody else? The second group, so those were our yes couples, our highly happy couples. The second group were the people who said that they were happy, where one or both couples said yes, exclamation point, or yes most of the time, but neither said, yeah, sometimes, or less. And the third group was the so-so couples, or the struggling couples, where one of the party, or sometimes both, said 3, 4, or 5. And it was important to match them, because you could have somebody who says, yeah, we're happy, but if the spouse says, that's, you want to say, okay, that's somebody that's looking for a little more attention.
Can I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
So one thing that we'd like to say is when you guys leave here tonight and get in the car together to drive home, do not ask one another, so what would you say of us? We did this in a very research-driven way. Nothing good will come from that question at this point. Let me just tell you that.
We give you the permission to say, Jeff and Shaunti say not to answer that question. Because seriously, we took them on a journey. There was a whole clinical process that we had them go through. It's not the same as getting in the car, closing the door, and going, okay, not the same thing at all.
We actually have learned this the hard way, because we've done these conferences, sometimes at like a weekend retreat, and the very next day we were riding up in an elevator with a couple, and they were standing, it was pretty icy. And we said, so how are things going? And they said, well, and they explained that she had asked him afterwards, you know, what would you say for us? And he said, oh, probably a 3. Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
And she goes, a 3? And he said, but honey, we're in marriage counseling. Like, that's, and she's like, I know, but a 3 means we're almost divorced. And so just don't.
Don't do it.
Okay, just don't. Okay, so first, can I jump into the secrets? Okay. The first of the really crucial secrets of the happy couples, and by the way, we're going to go so far as to say that this is the only one of all of them that's a prerequisite. That we found it is very, very difficult to be very happily married without this. And that is that these happy couples choose to believe the best of their spouse's intentions towards them, even when they're legitimately hurt. Everybody gets hurt. Even the best marriages, you hurt each other's feelings. That's just the way it works. We're just kind of stupid people sometimes. And yet, it is very natural in our sort of normal human tendencies. If if Jeff says something that hurts my feelings, it is a natural thought when it comes in, when whatever he says that comes in, for me to sort of go, ow. And the natural thought is to think, he knew how that would make me feel and he said it anyway. That's kind of a human emotion, right? The happiest couples switched it. They would still have the ow, and that then there was a moment where they said, either on purpose or automatically, because sometimes they had trained themselves to do this, they stopped and they went, ow, but no. I know he loves me. I know he cares about me, so he must not have known how that would make me feel or he wouldn't have said it. And they switch it to believing the best of their spouse's intentions towards them. And if that's a female example, but the male example is very similar, sort of an ow, kind of like nothing I do is good enough for her, or she doesn't appreciate me, or whatever that is, and going, no, I know she appreciates me. It just doesn't feel like it right this second, but I'm going to choose to believe that she didn't realize how that would come across, or whatever that is. This is so crucial to creating a good marriage.
I think we have time for that story of the couple,
Which story?
the Foodies, where she was.
We haven't spoken in front of a group of people in like a year, so I'm like,
the story where she's pregnant and they're going to have their first child.
Okay,
It's
you
such
sure?
it illustrates this point.
It does kind of illustrate this story. Okay, so one of the couples that we interviewed, one of the highly happy couples, they told this story of to me it was a perfect example of this. She was pregnant.
Actually, can I back you up just a sec?
Yes.
One of the things that Shaunti loved doing in all of these interviews was, we'd get them talking and then she'd say, take us through your last big fight. And it really would stir them up, but you get great stories as a result out of it. So this was one of them.
This was one of them. So she, during the scene of the story, she had been pregnant with their first child. And they had moved from a big city to a smaller area, and they were both sort of big city foodies. That was like one of their things that they just loved to do when they were living in New York or wherever they were living. And they moved out to this area that just didn't have those kinds of restaurants. And then all of a sudden, a very, very well-known chef starts a restaurant, and it's being built in their area, and they're taking reservations, and it was booked up for the reservations for the first 2 months. And so they said, how about making this, getting on the list, because it's going to be open right before the baby is born, and we can make this our last, big, special, romantic date before the baby comes and our lives change forever, And so they get on the list, and as the restaurant is being built, they're driving by and going, 2 more months until the big day, 1 more month, 3 more weeks, 5 more days, and they were all excited. And then the night of the reservation, the night of their date, he gets a phone call at work at 6:00 from a client, and he misses the reservation. All the guys in here are like,
how do you recover
from that one? And he comes running in late, and she tells us, she's like, I was so upset, and I was so hurt, and I was so mad, and my brain started going in all these different directions, like, we've got, now we're going to have a baby coming, and are you going to be working 100-hour weeks, and are you going to be ignoring the family? And, her brain starts going in all these directions. And before he runs in, she stops herself and believes the best. And she says, but wait, I know he was excited too. He was saying 5 more days, just like I was. So there must be another explanation for this. Write that down. There must be another explanation for this. What is a more generous explanation of this person's behavior? And so when he came in all flustered and worried, instead of launching into him, which is what she would have done, she was able to say, I'm so disappointed, which of course you have to be able to say, I'm so disappointed. But she was able to say, I'm so disappointed, what happened? Assuming that something had happened and that it wasn't just him being irresponsible or clueless or that he didn't care. And so he was able to lower his defenses, which were all up and ready for a fight, and he was able to tell her that what had happened was that at 6 o'clock, as he was about to leave, his phone had rung with, this client call, and his boss was sort of right kind of behind him in an open area behind them. And he said, I felt like I had to take the call because, there's always restructurings and I've got a wife and a baby on the way. Like I can't be on any question mark list. Now you can argue, well, he could have handled it a little differently. Like, hey, Bob, can I call you back from my cell phone? But the intention that he had towards her was good, not bad. And that is the key, is recognizing the intentions of your spouse, even when you are legitimately hurt, towards you are good.
And you remember what Shaunti said, that you can actually apply these things, even if there's just one member of the household that is wanting to use this information. There was a study that I came across while we were actually doing some of the research, and it's called The Power of Good Intentions. And it was a study that was conducted by a University of Maryland professor with a bunch of college students. And, I gotta tell you, I love college students because for $20, they will subject themselves to pretty much anything, and you get good data from them. Well, in this particular study, what they did was they would hook these college students up to all of these kind of sensors to read their, kind of physiological responses to a particular stimuli. And the stimuli was an electric shock that they would be administered or would be administered to them. So here's what happened. The group of subjects, students, were divided into 3 groups, and they were told a different thing about a person on the other side of a curtain that was going to be administering this electric shock to them. In one group, they were told that the person on the other side knows that when they push this button, it's going to give you a shock, but they also have been told that it will help you win money. It will create an opportunity for you to win money. The next group, they were told that the person on the other side of the curtain accidentally is hitting the button. They're not doing it on purpose. And then there was a third group where they were told that the person on the other side was actually doing it on purpose, knew it would hurt, really thought it was kind of cool. So it was no good interest there on that person. So what happened was they measured the physiological responses of all of these individuals when they would receive these shocks. And as you would imagine, when they thought that someone was doing it on purpose for no good reason, it hurt a lot. And that's what it registered physiologically. If they thought it was done on accident, it registered less pain. And if they thought the person administering the shock had good motivations toward them, good intentions, it hurt considerably less. The shock was the exact same in all of the instances, but it was what you perceived of the intentions of the shocker mattered. And this goes exactly to what we found with these couples in the believing the best.
It works the exact same way in marriage. So there's so much more that we could say about this. Honestly, there are reams and reams of data and all sorts of really fascinating illustrations. But I would just encourage you just to start by going, are there times when I am jumping to a bad assumption about my spouse's intentions towards me? And realize that when you choose to switch it and believe the best of their intentions, it's not wishful thinking. What we found on the data was that almost 100%, now it wasn't 100, it was 99 point 0.267% or something like that. But it was almost 100% of people, even in very, very difficult marriages, care about each other, and they care about their spouse, and they want the best for them. So when you are choosing to believe the best, you are choosing to believe what is true rather than what is a lie that is only going to hurt your marriage and hurt you. So that's the first sort of encouragement for you. The second secret that we found, let's switch to another one of these secrets. Now, we always choose to do this one, even though it sometimes gets us into a little bit of trouble.
And I think it's my favorite.
Is it really?
Well, it's fun. It's not as impactful as the believe the best, but it's fun, and it's something that perhaps
is different.
Well, if anyone who has ever done kind of like premarital counseling for other individuals, this probably maybe kind of sort of goes against some of the things you may have said.
We have to apologize to the pastors in the room, because this is going to probably go against what some of the pastors or premarital counseling has done. Because when we would interview these happy couples, whether they'd been married a year or whether they'd been married 50 or 60 years, one of the pieces of advice that they always gave us, I think almost always, one of the pieces of advice was, it is really important to never go to bed mad. It's really important to do that. And so we would always say, oh, absolutely, we totally agree. So, do you ever go to bed mad? Well, it's a really important principle, and we were telling Joe and Carla the other day, I'm like, no, I get it. It's an important principle. But when we would push on them, what we would find is that out of the 1,000 couples that were in our study group, we found 3 who said they never went to bed mad. And so here's what they were actually telling us that's a really, really important nuance to create great relationships and avoiding putting some obstacles in the way, which is that it turns out that everybody agrees, all of the happiest couples agree, that there are occasions, like it's a good idea to not go to bed mad, like the scripture talks about it, there's sort of, the concept is a good one, but that there are occasions when you have 2 upset, angry, exhausted people trying to duke it out at 1 a.m, nothing good is going to come from that point on, right? And so these happy couples had learned that they needed at times to just table the conversation and pick it back up the next morning. And that statistically, we found, was actually the difference between the happiest couples and everybody else, is what happened the next morning. Because the couples who were sort of, they're happy, they're generally happy, or maybe they've got some challenges, it was far more likely that those couples would sometimes just kind of, the next morning, if that issue was still there, they would just sort of hope it went away and not want to deal with it, right? But the happiest couples, if that issue was still there the next morning, they didn't let it go. They dealt with it. And that statistically was a really, really important thing for us.
Because when you think of it, sometimes a good night's sleep solves the problem. It's kind of like we'll wake up and we'll go like, what was that all about? But one of the things about Shaunti is you can tell she's a student. She loves learning things, applying things. And, scripture, Ephesians 4:26, be angry and sin not, let not the sun go down on your anger. That's the scripture that a lot of people use when they talk about don't go to bed mad. And so Shaunti and I, quite frankly, she would wear me out at 10 o'clock at night and say, we can't go to bed. We want God's favor on our marriage, so we have to strive to do this the right way. And I would then kind of like resort to lawyer mode. And I would say, look, we didn't start fighting till after the sun was down. That means I've got 24 hours before it's going down again. I'm going to bed.
Some of the men are applauding right now.
Yeah. Not the best choice for marital harmony, but I slept. So why don't you tell them about this particular principle really was a bit of a challenge for us, because everything that we have researched over the years, it dovetailed with what Scripture says. I mean, truth is truth. And so we had this real conflict. Do we write about this? Even if the happy couples do this, but is it
unbiblical?
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a real struggle there, because does it really matter if we
Right.
find that the happy couples do this if it's anti-biblical, right?
Right.
Like, that was a bit of an issue. And I was just conflicted, just because, wait, how can it be truth and working if it's against the Bible? Like, that would be the first time we'd ever seen that. And then I was telling a pastor who was a licensed counselor as well, I was telling him about this concern I had, and he kind of chuckled, and he brought me over to his paper Bible, not the one on your phone, and he flipped through it to Ephesians 4:26, and he said, you see that little caret that's there at Ephesians 4:26, and if you look at your Bible, you'll see the same thing, and it's a quote. Ephesians 4:26 is the Apostle Paul referencing a verse from the Psalms, and that his audience would have been very familiar with. And it's referencing Psalms 4:4. He was quoting Psalms 4:4, which says, Ephesians 4:26 says, in your anger do not sin, don't let the sun go down in your anger. Psalms 4:4 says, in your anger do not sin, think about it overnight and remain silent.
Yes. It's just perfect. It's perfect.
And so the key, as this pastor pointed out, is the key is, in your anger, do not sin. If you need to duke it out before you go to bed in order to not sin in your anger, do that. If you need to think about it overnight and avoid saying something you're going to regret, or agreeing to something you're going to resent the next day, or whatever it is to not sin in your anger, do that. The key is to treat your spouse in this way that's not sinning in your anger.
And now let me say something to the guys here, because we'll get into this more tomorrow when we talk about the differences between men and women and kind of our unique brain wiring that each of us have. One of the things that we'll talk a bit more about is that for our wives in particular, the need for reassurance in times when there is conflict going on, or potential conflict in the relationship. And the fact is that for us guys, we can usually kind of just push it out of our mind, just if we want to, for the most part.
Most men, not all, but
not
most,
all,
yeah.
but most. That isn't the way our wives' brains tend to be able to handle those sorts of things. So just recognize that fact. Even if you're able to just roll over and go to sleep, she may be looking at the ceiling for the next 3 or 4 hours. So there's a way of reassuring her that, look, we will deal with this in the morning. I just need to get some sleep, but I promise you, we'll deal with this when we're both fresh.
Exactly. So the next secret, let's turn to secret number 3, okay? The next secret is to do something that I'm going to let you guess. I'm going to tell you a story, and I'm going to let you try to diagnose what this gentleman was doing. Okay, because this was the kind of story that we would hear all the time, and we had to go, what's going on? And we usually couldn't tell until we'd heard it 117 times, and we're like, that's what's going on. So we were asking one of these happiest couples, take us through your last argument, and they kind of winced, and it was something that had happened the week before. This gentleman he was an executive management consultant or something, and he had been working on this deal for a couple of months, had been working these horrible hours, and finally they'd gotten to the week of the big deal, and Thursday morning at 6 o'clock he was going to get on a plane and fly away and sign this big deal. And Wednesday he called his wife, who was a stay-at-home mom, 3 little kids, called his wife 3 times to say, all my shirts are at the dry cleaners, and I'm going to have those shirts when, for the trip, And so you're sure you're okay to pick up the shirts at the dry cleaners. We used to have like suits and shirts and offices and stuff. Gosh, this story seems so old now, and it's only just a couple years old. Anyway, but back in the day when we had to have ties and suits and work clothes, he actually was really worried about whether or not his wife would remember to get these shirts at the dry cleaners. So he said, I will go. I will leave my office on my lunch hour and go. She's like, I'm fine. I've got it. It's okay. And he called 3 times. And she said, it's okay. I'll get it. He comes home at 10 o'clock at night to find the dry cleaners closed, and his wife has forgotten the shirts. And then we're like, and what happened? And he said, I was so upset. And he said, I've been busting my tail. He's like, I went downstairs. He's a woodworker on his sort of off hours. And he said, I went stomping downstairs to my, woodworking shop. And I'm like, what are you thinking? And he says, I'm taking out a rubber mallet and I'm pounding these 2 pieces of wood together. And he's like, it's like she doesn't appreciate all the work that I've put in, and she told me that she'd do it and she forgot. But you know what? That's really not fair, because the kids were sick and they had to go to the doctor, and he recounts this long thing about the fact that she had to go to one doctor and then the other, and the pharmacy was closed and she had to go back to this other pharmacy. And then he says she gets to the end of the day and she's got to run and make dinner for us, and she always makes dinner for us. Even when I get home super late at night, she's always so attentive. Why am I being such a jerk? What did he do there? What did he do? He talked himself out of being mad. He switched his thoughts from the very real and legitimate issues that were there, and he switched his thoughts to something that was good about his wife, something that he could praise, something that was worth focusing on. And it changed how he felt. It is a very, very common thing for us to think that our feelings just are what they are, and that we can't change them. We can change what we do, but we can't change our feelings. That's kind of the sort of the concept. No, the highly happy couples had learned how to actually change their feelings. I love this one comment that a woman told us. She said, my feelings used to really boss me around. And she had been in one of the marriages. We had a study group of people who had moved from being extremely unhappy in their marriages to being extremely happy. And she was one of the highly happy crowd. And she said, my feelings used to boss me around, but I've learned if you want a happy marriage, you have to learn to boss your feelings around. And I realized, actually in talking to her, there was something that clicked in Jeff and I's minds about our own marriage in the middle of this research project. We suddenly kind of woke up and went, wait a second, because we realized in the middle of this research project, we realized that we had one of these highly happy marriages, that this was, we were both sort of yes, exclamation point couples, but it wasn't always that way. And there were plenty of nights where like one of us would sleep in the guest bedroom because I can't stand to sleep next to somebody who doesn't care about me, those kinds of feelings.
And then the way Shaunti felt was...
We'll work this out later. Anyway, but what we did realize suddenly was like, wait a minute, we're one of these highly happy couples now. What changed? When did that happen? And we started to realize, as we started to see the data come back on this topic, that the highly happy couples boss their feelings around. The highly happy couples have learned how to change their feelings. We realized that it was tied directly to something that Jeff had done when I was turning 39, just a couple years ago. When I was turning 39. Do you mind telling that story? Because I think it's really important in this context.
I can. So when Shaunti turned 39, I was thinking 40's a big number. I mean, not that it's an old number, nothing like that. It's an important birthday. And so I thought, I need to really step it up and do something really special for her. So I decided to write her a book, which was going to be a year in the life of Shaunti Feldhahn, which every day I was going to do a journal entry of things that occurred in our life together and with the kids, and just create this.
Even if it was just a few sentences about what happened that day.
And
or what you were feeling or thinking.
It was the hardest thing that I have ever undertaken to do. And now,
by the way, you need to tell them something
so
at this point.
I will. Let me, because I know every guy out there is thinking, I hate this guy. He's saying this publicly, and my wife is hearing this. Trust me, I am the worst gift giver on the planet. She'll agree. I mean,
I'm not saying anything.
For example, I mean, it's just something, I'm really challenged in that area. When she was pregnant with our first daughter, for Christmas, I gave her a pregnancy workout video. I thought she likes to stay fit and all those things. She'd love it. So anyways, back to the story. So what would happen is...
So in other words, you're saying that this was an outlier?
It was an outlier.
Okay,
and
so not to put pressure on...
Please.
Yes, okay.
So what would happen is, at the end of every day, say 9, 10 o'clock at night, I would go down to my home office and I would sit at my computer and type out the day. And there were times when, at that moment, I wasn't in a good spot because we had been arguing or fighting, and I wanted to be honest to what had occurred in our life in that particular day. So I am hitting the keys really hard.
And you do this, and you said this.
And so I'm writing it down. I'm trying to be honest. And as I would look through the stuff, I'd think, 30 years from now, our kids might find and read this book. And they'll go, Dad, you sounded like such a jerk. So what I would do is I would write those things the way I was feeling it. But then I would force myself to go, but. And then I would start to type out the things that Shaunti does well, that I often take so for granted and don't ever acknowledge. And I would write those things, and it's maybe a couple of sentences here or there. And before I knew it, all of that heat and anger that I was feeling was gone. And I'd come up the stairs and go to sleep. I wasn't agitated and anxious and all of those things that you feel when you're angry. And so what would happen is, over 365 days of that, it began to be a habit, so that even in the moment, even before I got to sit down to write.
Like even in the middle of actually having a conflict without realizing it,
I would start playing through my list of things that Shaunti does, and it would help me to believe the best.
And what the happiest couples described, and what Jeff realized that he had started to do during that year, is that they would derail that negative train of thought before it ever got started, really. And that is a powerful habit.
And so what happens here, and it's not some Jedi mind trick that you're playing on yourself. What it is, it's Psalm 103:2, which is my favorite verse in all of Scripture. It's Psalm 103:2, which says, "Praise the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits." It's so many times we have to look back in order to have the faith to walk forward. We look back and see faithfulness. I looked back and I saw the things that Shaunti had done in my life, in our life.
Give them an example, like a day-to-day
Okay, so
example.
a day-to-day example. Okay.
Sorry, am I fishing? I think I'm fishing.
I can't
for
even think of
compliments.
any right now. Oh, maybe one. So Shaunti is perhaps the most mentally organized person I've ever met on the planet. She holds so much in her head, and it's organized in some filing system, and she can pull it out and work it, and it's amazing. Physical organization, however, is a little different.
Not so much.
I tend to be a kind of person, maybe a little OCD. I don't know.
Just a little.
There's a place for everything, and everything has its place. I like order. I like things being put away, and that isn't kind of the way that our life happens.
It's not a gift that I have. Let's just put it that way.
So,
I tend to be the messy
So
one.
what would happen, and this caused some of the struggles and arguments in our marriage. You know, I'd come home from meeting with a client or something, and there would be dishes, you know, from lunch or whatever, breakfast, you know, just sitting around, or maybe the kids' toys were everywhere, and I would feel that sense of, does it really take that much effort just to put them in the dishwasher or to put the toys away or whatever it was? And what I realized after a while was, you know, when I was single, I had an apartment that was absolutely put together just the way I liked it. Everything put away, and I was alone. When I would see those dishes there or those clothes laying over there, that was evidence that I was married to this amazing woman who loves me. And those toys that were laying in the living room were evidence that I've got two little kids that think I'm pretty cool. Instead of looking at those things for what I originally saw them as obstacles or things to annoy, it became something that was evidence of a pretty good life that I was grateful for.
It's amazing what happens when you start trying to train yourself in this way. So just remember Psalm 103, verse 2. Write that one down and forget not all of his benefits, and use that as an example, as a guiding force also to remember that about
Do you want me
your spouse.
to do the next one?
Yes.
Which is number 4, which is that the happiest couples treat one another as their best friends. And so that was an interesting.
It sounds so simple.
It does. And I remember when we used to live in New York, and our pastor, Tim Keller, I don't know if any of you know the name, but he's just amazing. And anyways,
It was like sitting under C.S. Lewis every Sunday.
It was fantastic.
It was amazing.
And so he in one of his sermons, he said this thing. He was quoting from a study that what was the number one predictor of people becoming best friends?
And staying best
And
friends.
staying best friends. Would anyone care to venture what it is? So if you're like me or like Shaunti, when we first heard this, of course we think we know what helps to make best friendships. You know, maybe it's common interests. You know, maybe it's similar temperaments.
Similar personalities,
All
shared
of those
values.
sorts of things. It's none of those.
Those are a distant second, third, fourth.
To the number one predictor, which is?
The number one predictor of friendship is geographic proximity. You're the best friends with the people that you see the most often and you spend the most time with. And all of us know that this is true because we've all had really, really close friends, and then one of us moved away. And you love each other, like you still really care for each other.
And you get on the phone and you can talk and it's all great.
But it's just not the same. And it turns out that the happiest couples, first and foremost, treat each other like best friends, which includes a lot of just hangout time, which I know everybody has been getting a lot of this last year. And it's actually one of the reasons why, contrary to popular belief, happiness in marriage has actually been going up during the pandemic, rather than down, is because we're spending more time with each other. Now, there's a couple of sort of things that we can actually do that make a big difference, but let me give you an example of just one of them for people who are feeling disconnected. This was one of the people in the study group that had moved from being extremely difficult in a difficult marriage situation to that marriage becoming extremely happy. This one young wife, they had 3 little kids, and they were shaking towards divorce. There's no other way of putting that. They were just in a very, very difficult state. And she said, what changed? She actually traced what actually changed in their marriage. Because now, a year later, they were extremely happy. And she said it all changed when she decided to look at their calendar and figure out how much time she and her husband were actually spending together just talking, like just being together like they used to be.
In one another's presence.
In one another's presence, and just kind of hanging out and not talking about the kids' activities or whatever, but just, being friends. And because the kids had all these different activities and their work schedules were so crazy, she said she looked at the previous week, and the previous week it had been 15 minutes. That's all the time that they had had to just kind of connect. And she's like, no wonder our marriage is in so much trouble. We're not even friends anymore. Because here's the key. If you are friends, you can work out anything. But that real core of friendship and goodwill towards each other has to be built back sometimes, or certainly protected and kept, and to try to avoid it ever going away. So what this young wife and mom did is she said this whole thing changed when she said, okay, this is ridiculous. Like, no wonder we're almost divorced. We're not even friends anymore. And so she said, what can we do differently? And it was pretty hard at a very short notice situation to try to figure out exactly, make big changes. So she said, here's what I realized I could at least do this. And she said, twice a week, her husband in the evening, right, immediately after dinner or right before dinner, would take their 7 or 8 year old to T-ball or something, I think. And she said, I realized that I could go with him. And she said, there was no reason in the world for me to load up a toddler and a baby and go to T-ball practice with him. But she said, but that is 20 minutes in the car on the way there and 20 minutes on the way back twice a week. And she said at the beginning, that is literally all we changed. But it gave them that time to connect again that they hadn't had in forever, and they started rebuilding their friendship. And then from there, they were able to really enjoy each other again and keep going. And now here they were a year later, one of our most highly happy couples. It turns out, again, this is not rocket science. Now, we talked to... Do I have time to tell about the counselor who advised spending time together? Is that okay? I'll tell you, for anyone here who's in a shaky situation or sort of feels like we really need to reconnect again, we spoke to a counselor in southern Texas, and she ran this counseling center that had exploded over the previous, I want to say like 10, 15 years, because almost every, not every, but almost every couple of whatever the deepest, darkest marriage place that they were in, separated, divorce papers filed, like whatever state that they were in, this counselor and the counseling center that she trained had this success rate of almost 100% success in saving marriages. And we were speaking for their counseling center, and I said, tell me what's your secret? Of course, we're in the middle of this project. I want to know. And she said, you're going to think it's stupid. And I'm like, tell me what it is. And she said, we refuse to start the counseling process for 2 weeks, and we give them something to do for 2 weeks. I was like, okay, what is it? She said, I won't have them back in the office until they pledge that for 2 weeks, every day, they will spend 30 minutes just hanging out and just talking with each other and not fighting. And she said for 30 minutes, they have to just have their normal, previous life, friendly conversations. And she said, now, if you want to, you can set a timer for 30 minutes and start fighting after that. But for 30 minutes, you have to just be friends again. And she said, and because of that, by the time that they get into my office for their first session 2 weeks later, they're okay enough to be able to start working on whatever that they need to work on. They've built that foundation back. So just as a sort of a little prompt for some of you who may want to try that, it really is astounding.
Well, and we should also say that, we've told you given you 4 or 5 different things here. Maybe don't try all 5 all at once.
That's right, that's important.
Pick out one of them, believe the best, and work that one, and build off of it.
We always say, pick one, or have your spouse, and maybe have your spouse pick one for you.
That's right. And the other thing is, we're not naive enough to think that the big issues that do exist in marriages all of a sudden go away because of doing these things. But what we've found, and what a lot of people have found, is that by working on these little things, it makes the bigger issue things easier to tackle.
Great way of putting it. Now, we're gonna wrap up in just a second, but I want to show. I don't know if Pastor Ron, do they have the slides? Okay, I want to show you just a few slides. We're going to show these again tomorrow, but I'm going to encourage you to think about a couple of things. First, can we show the slide for the books? Because we have books over there, I think. Somewhere. Yeah. Yes, there we go. So we brought just a few of the books because we honestly didn't know how many people would be here and how many books. So hopefully we have enough. And at Riverside, we have books for you as well. I'm sorry, I don't think we have any books on Maui. That would be fun though. We can bring them to you in person at some point. But we have the For Women Only and For Men Only books, which we will be talking about tomorrow. That's Understanding Men and Women. We have Thriving in Love and Money, which is the book I think that you guys mentioned that just came out, and then the one that we've been talking about tonight, which is The Secrets of the Highly Happy Marriages. So the next slide that I'd love to show you is about our blog. If you are interested, you could just snap this QR code on your phone. We have every week we have 1, sometimes 2 little articles that are come out with what's our latest research and what's the tip of the day, kind of what's the stuff that we think is really, really crucial that is going to help your marriage, that's part of this little things make a big difference sort of idea. Now, by the way, we're also, we're super excited about the fact, if you go back 1 blog, we also have a sneak peek of our home video studio, which is kind of fun because we're going to be starting creating some videos. So you have to sort of go back a day or 2 in order to see that, but that might be kind of fun. And then finally, okay, I'm just going to ask, you don't have to do this, but if you are interested, we right now for the next 3 weeks, we are in the middle of our next research project. If you are interested, you have to participate as a couple, but it's one of these surveys where you can't be sitting together when you're taking the survey. We would love to have you sign up to participate as a married couple. And you have to commit, though, that you're willing to give your honest opinion, your honest, candid thoughts about the topic, and not be together when you take it. So,
and what is the topic?
I knew you were going to make me say this out loud. Okay, so you know how our last book was on money in marriage? Guess what other big topic we're tackling next? I can't even say it out loud. It's like, are we saying sex in church? But we're in a parking garage, so maybe that's okay. So anyway, that's the topic. that we're going to be, and it's a very, don't worry, it's a very sort of appropriate survey. It's not explicit, but we'd love your honest, candid input, because I hate to say this, most of the research that's been done on this topic is kind of bad. I mean, honestly, a lot of the research has been with college students, and we're really, really committed to getting really good, real married people data out there. So we'd love your we'd love your input. Thank you. So let's wrap up. Let's wrap up with what we found as sort of the most, I think, encouraging secret of the ones that we get a chance to share tonight. It was astounding how often doing random interviews. Now, I should explain, I guess we didn't say this, that one of our main research methods at the beginning of any study is literally to stop random people, like in grocery stores and airports and coffee shops, and ask them questions. Now, not on this next topic of research, by the way, that we're talking about. This is the one study that if I stop people and ask them questions on that, I would get arrested. But in this one about the happy marriages, when we saw a couple that seemed to be at peace with one another, we would stop and ask them questions, and we had a little way of determining sort of which category they fit in. And we would always, even if it was just a couple in the airport, for just 2 minutes, we would say, "What's your secret?" And that was like our big, I just wanted to hear what they said. And it was amazing the number of times I would explain what we were doing, our research, our books, and say, "What's your secret?" And the couple would look at each other and look at me and say, "It's because of Jesus Christ." And you could tell they were like, "Oh, this is a chance to witness to a social researcher." Like, you could tell they were all excited about this. But here's the thing I want to encourage you guys with. Every study that has ever been done on marriages, including ours, has found that the happiest people, the happiest marriages, are those that put God at the center of their marriage and their life. And we really want to encourage you, because that is not what you hear from the news, and that's not what you hear. Even sometimes in the church, so many people believe the myth that, the rate of divorce is the same in the church. It's not true. It turns out that is a total misunderstanding of Barna's data on that. He wasn't studying people in the church. When you actually add whether people actually attend church regularly, the divorce rates plummet and the rates of happiness go way up. It's just that we're imperfect people in not perfect marriages, but we are putting God at the center, and He is able to hold all of us and help us achieve these things that we're dreaming for. So
that's it.
Thank you, guys. We'll see you tomorrow.
You.